Boom. All right, guys, we're back with It's Dad Time, and today we have Hadley. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
So we have a mutual friend, Kelly, who told me that I had to have you on, and
Yes.
I was at first. Okay, so we're gonna talk about, I guess, what the mommy wine culture it's called. Is that what this? I don't know about this. I found out about it like 2 weeks ago. So
Yes.
okay.
It's a big thing. It's a big thing.
I had no idea. And then I actually found that there's like a hard cider or something called like Mommy Time or something out there now that's like a vodka infused drink. And I'm like, oh my God, this shit's real. So why don't you tell everybody kind of a little bit about yourself and what you have going on? And then let's talk about this mommy wine culture and why you've chosen to be sober.
Sure. So my name is Hadley Sorensen, and I actually live up in the Washington, D.C. area. In fact, Kelly, our mutual friend, we've known each other since elementary school. We went to school with each other from fifth grade all the way up through high school, and it's amazing, sort of the parallels in our lives now. So I am a mom of 3 boys, and I'm a runner and a writer, and I've become a big advocate in the sobriety community. In fact, my debut book is coming out next Tuesday, May 14th.
Love it.
It's called The Dirty Truth on Social Drinking: Everything in Moderation and Other BS. And so I'm really excited about that. It's been a long time coming. Um, my kind of story with drinking and how I ended up here doing what I'm doing today, I was very much what most people would describe as a social drinker, right? My drinking followed social conventions. I was drinking the same way everyone around me was drinking. Um, but from the very first time I got drunk at 14, I always felt like something was just kind of toxic about my relationship with alcohol. It never felt right. If I really think about it now, it's like my intuition had been screaming at me since I was 14 years old that something was not right about this. But I just ignored it because it's kind of
It's
what we're
what we do.
supposed to do.
Right. It's what
Yeah.
we do. Yeah.
So I went right from the, drinking in high school at like fields and, parties in
The
fields
best.
or at
Those were the
people's
days.
houses when the parent was out of town to the full blown like college binge drinking scene. And then from there, I slipped really seamlessly into this mommy wine culture kind of thing that we're going to talk about. I have a stepson who is 25 now, and then a almost 13-year-old and a 14-year-old. And so I became a mom really soon after college. I got married at 25. My stepson was 4 at the time. So I became a mom really, really quickly, right?
Sure.
Before I even had my own. And this mommy wine culture thing, it was like the same people who had been binge drinking in college were now binge drinking expensive wine in the cul-de-sac while we had the baby monitors on to listen for the kids.
Oh my.
Yeah.
It's definitely not
And
something
so
I'm used to or know about. We didn't. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
yeah, so it was just very normal, right? Using quotes. And so that continued this kind of roller coaster of, binge drinking on the weekends. I was a blackout drinker, which was always like a source of a lot of shame for me. And one of the red flags, like from early on, hey, maybe this isn't
The
something you should
healthiest
be
thing.
doing. Ignored it, until finally in 2021, I kind of had this awakening and literally woke up at 3 in the morning after 2 bottles of rosé and said, "I am so sick and tired of feeling sick and tired. I'm done repeating the same crap over and over again, expecting a different result,
Right.
and I'm done." So I walked away from drinking, and I haven't looked back, and I've started to kind of use my voice to educate people. It's not about judging people who drink, it's about educating them about sort of the dangers and the issues around this mommy wine phenomenon, and the impact it has on women and kids and, how we can do things differently.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I got here.
So do you you don't have to answer any questions you don't want to, first off, but do you drink at all anymore? Like if you and your husband go to a gala, do you have a glass of wine when it's just you two?
Nope. I have been completely alcohol free for it'll be 3 years in August.
Nice. I bet you feel amazing.
I feel so good.
Yeah.
I
2
feel
bottles
so
of
good.
rosé in one day. That's a steep bill to pay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was really taking a toll on my mental health too. And I was really like, it took me a long time to kind of see the connection.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, the difference has been
Extraordinary.
incredible.
So, all right, I think you said your children were 15 and 13. How old are you? Oh, well, 24,
25 and then 12 and 14.
12 and 14. So 9 and 11. What have they noticed change in mom at those ages? Because they're at an age at 9 and 11 where they can see the difference. It's not like they're 4, right?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, it's been really cool to go through this process at the ages that they were at. So I had, I wasn't necessarily drinking every day. I wasn't drinking in the morning. I wasn't
Sure.
like the stereotype of what you think of as somebody with a problem, right? And I had rules that I followed, right? So my kids never really saw me drunk. However, they notice a lot, right? They notice that mom opens a bottle of wine at 5 p.m. every day and maybe just has one glass, but that it's a big part of it's a big part of every, time we get together with friends, every celebration, everything kind of revolves around alcohol. And they see all that. And I've been really open with them since I chose to quit drinking. They know that, now they're like preteen and teenager, they know a lot more about alcohol and what it means to be drunk and what they're gonna be faced with in the next couple years in terms of choices, and so we have some really open, frank conversations about it. Um, they know my book is coming out next
Yeah.
week. They're gonna read it, which is kinda nerve-wracking. Um, they know I'm out on Instagram talking about all of this stuff. They could be at this age really embarrassed that their mom is out there on
Sure.
Instagram talking about sobriety, but they're not. They think it's kind of cool, and so it's been a cool experience because they're proud of me. They're really educated about drinking and all that goes along with it. If they do choose to drink one day, which, I'm not naive enough to think they're
Of
never gonna
course.
drink,
Of course.
but they're gonna know a lot more than I did
Yeah.
when I chose to drink at
Well,
14.
drinking to escape and drinking because you just want to have a couple drinks are two completely different things.
Yes.
Yeah. It's actually interesting you bring that up now, like in terms of that, because I had been with somebody in the past where I remember thinking like, when something stressful happens, it's always like, man, I need a glass of wine. And I'm like, I'm not sure that's the right response that we should be having. And so it's interesting how quickly, though, as a mom, you can get sucked into that because the foot never gets taken off the gas pedal, especially if you own a business or something and you have 2, 3 children constantly needing you. If you've developed the coping mechanism of having a glass of wine, and I'm not even talking alcoholism, I'm just simply talking about like, this is just what I do when I'm stressed.
Yeah.
That can be a slippery slope downhill.
It is, but also think about the message it sends to our kids, right? Our job as parents is to teach our kids how to problem solve, how to handle life's challenges, how to cope when things get hard. Well, when we have that, oh my gosh, I need a freaking drink attitude,
Yeah.
they pick up on that. They
100%.
see that that's how we handle stress.
Yep.
And that's how we're teaching them to do it.
Yeah. Well, and I've, by no means I barely ever drink in front of my daughter. Not like kind of by design, whatever, but if I do, it's never in a stress state ever.
Yeah.
I mean, she's probably seen me drink a handful of times and I'm not even sure she's aware that I'm actually drinking,
Right.
But the times I have had a drink when I'm stressed, because we've all done it and I'm not going to pretend like I haven't.
Yeah.
I was always like, okay, I got to make sure she's asleep. Like kind of probably what some of your rules were, like I can have a glass or 2 before they go to bed, but the second bottle doesn't get opened until they're fast asleep. Like we can justify those things in our head, and it's interesting how that happens. But I guess I'm going to share this story. I don't think I've talked about it on the podcast of why I don't smoke weed or do edibles or anything like that either. And I know it's another big one. People smoke a lot of weed all day long, whatever. Again, I don't care. Do whatever works for you. For me, I notice actually it affects my body more than if I have a drink or two. Like if I have 2 glasses of tequila at night or something, I don't notice it. But if I smoke a joint or if I eat an edible, I feel so hungover the next day. But I'll never forget this. Like it breaks my heart. Sloan was probably 2.5, 3 years old. And maybe you've had this book too, where it's like ABC goes up the coconut tree.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a silly book, but it's not that silly. Well, I ate an edible and I read her that book, right? Oh my, I was in tears. I couldn't even finish the book. I was laughing so hard. She was laughing so hard. Like, I mean, it was like that moment, like my ex-wife was watching me. She's in tears laughing at me because then Sloane's laughing. And it's this whole cycle of like the hilariousness of this book that's not actually funny. So then like she goes to bed, whatever. Well, the next day she brings me the book to read and I read it. And she's like, Dad, laugh like you did yesterday.
Oh my
and
God.
I was like, ugh. I almost threw up. I almost started crying because it really isn't that funny. And I was like, never again, never again am I ever going to do that. And I haven't since. That was the last edible I ate, the last time I ever smoked any. I haven't. And not that I wouldn't do it recreationally, maybe if like me and my boys are at hunting camp or something, like that's not the point I'm getting at, but that drew a hard line in the sand, how terrible that made me feel in my stomach. And I feel like this can be the same thing.
Yeah, when you have kids and you suddenly start to see these scenarios through their eyes, it's really an eye opener. In fact, I mean, my boys were a big part of sort of why I reached this realization that summer in 2021 because we have a lake house that's about 2 hours from our home in the DC area. And so we spend a lot of weekends there, a lot of time in the summer. And that was the summer right after COVID, right? And my husband had actually had cancer during 2020 during COVID. And so we'd been really locked down because he had a, compromised immune system.
Yeah.
So we were really excited in 2021 to have friends back at the lake house for weekends, which of course was like, it's like vacation drinking.
Yeah.
Yep. Like people come for the weekend and they're ready to get their drink on.
Yeah.
And we were right there with them. But the kids were just getting old enough that they were noticing like, hey, all the adults are getting drunk. And even though I was careful not to get drunk in front of them or until like after they went to bed, I watched them like rating which of the adults were the drunkest. And it was like, and it wasn't just my kids, it was like groups of like all our friends.
Sure.
There'd be like 6 kids and they're all like having these conversations. And I was like, this is not okay. This is what they're learning about alcohol. I don't want them to binge drink their way through high school and college like I did. But right now, we're showing them that that's normal and it's funny and it's what you do as an adult too. And it was really eye-opening for me. I didn't want to set that example for them anymore.
I think that's the biggest part of like I heard a quote the other day. I'm trying to find it real quick because it pertains to exactly this. And it was something like 80% of our thoughts are negative and 90% of our thoughts are repetitive. And so basically we're stacking the deck not in our favor already. That's just living life, right? That 80% of our thoughts are negative and then 90% are repeating thoughts. So that's not a great number, Right. And I mean, I think about this a lot too, like, cause I talk to Sloan my daughter in a very specific way. I do things in a very specific way. There's times that I'm very stoic with her because I know her emotional system is at its max. And then she needs stoicism to be able to anchor into like, this is how we can interact with these situations. And again, when they're observing and they're showing those things, where are we leading their subconscious mind, especially at these formative years, of how to deal with life instead of having healthy, normal conversations? But I think it's a great thing now though, because now your daughter's at the age when you started drinking, right now, and being able to have open conversations and have a safe place that's like, hey, Mom, everybody was at the party drinking and, you know, I had a drink, and not being shamed for it or whatever. Like, what that looked like is huge.
Yeah. Well, and here's the other thing, you know, with the 14-year-old who's going to be in high school next year, which is terrifying. I always tell him, if you're in a situation where you need an escape, like you need to get out, something's happening that you're not comfortable with, or whatever, or people are drinking, or whatever, no questions asked, call me and I'll come pick you up.
Yep.
Well, the old me would have been opening a bottle of wine at 5 o'clock on Friday night and ready to relax with my wine. What happens when my boys are out at parties? And I mean, would I have to send an Uber because I'd been drinking and I couldn't
Jesus.
pick them up? Like,
Yeah. And then you're mad at them for being a party while they're drinking, and then they come home and you're drunk. Yeah.
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 I just, that, you know, it really, really made me think about how I wanted to show up for them in these formative years.
Yeah. I wonder, do you think this is just because you brought up high school was terrifying? Do you think our parents were terrified like this? Or do you think everything's changing at such a rapid rate that we're like, holy shit?
So I think it's a combination of things, right? Tell me if you agree with this. I think kids are doing a lot of the same shit we were doing, right?
Sure.
But I think that social media and having these phones on them all the time, I think we as parents are much more aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
Um, there's the added fears around like fentanyl and all
Sure.
of that kind of stuff. Kids are doing a lot of the same crap, but like if we were gonna smoke weed in high school, it was just weed. Now we're worried about, is our
Right.
kid gonna smoke weed, or is it gonna be laced, or are they gonna go to this party and it's gonna show up on social media, so they're gonna get kicked off their travel team or
Right. Or not get a
whatever.
job later in life or whatever. Yeah. I think there is a lot of that.
Yeah.
It's also, you know, my dad had brought up a good point. One of my good friends, the story's really hilarious, but long story short, I had brought in a friend. I was living in a town that had really, really, really good weed when I was in college. Okay. So I came back for hunting camp and got asked to bring the really, really, really good weed with me. So I did for him, right? And he was at my house and he was smoking some, and we peer pressured my dad into smoking weed because he used to brag about how he grew it outside of school before, you know, we were born. You know, he's like, whatever. And he smoked it and he was like, it's from the devil. He's like, we smoke dirt. He's like, you had to smoke a pound of weed to get high back in the day. He's like, this is insane how much it's changed. And I do think that plays a role into like how terrifying it is because, you know, and again, to play off that, I guess all my drinking stories come back to hunting camp. We were at hunting camp and it was when flavored vodkas came out for the first time. Oh. And I remember having kiwi strawberry Pinnacle vodka and mixing it with Hawaiian punch. And my dad was making fun of me for drinking it. And I was like, just try it. And he tried it and he was like, there's alcohol in there. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, if that existed when this group of people were your age, we'd all be dead because like it tasted terrible, you know? Yeah. And it's like, so I do think a lot has changed now that you're bringing that up.
I mean, we were drinking the first time I drank at 14, where I was at a friend's grandmother's house the grandma was out of town. Son was like, had the keys. We drank the peach and mint schnapps.
Mad Dog 2020.
Like, yes.
Yeah.
A good night was when you could score a bottle of Boone's Farm, like Strawberry Hill or whatever. Yeah. I mean, things have just changed. So it's like they're still trying to do and get away with the same stuff. It's just the stakes are higher.
Yeah.
And I just don't really think my parents were nearly as worried.
I don't think they were as worried. I don't even think they were as connected either. I don't think they were aware of like what happens to the child's psyche when you're communicating with them in an incorrect manner or whatever's happening. You know, I don't think questions were asked very often. Like, well, why did you end up in this situation? It was just, you ended up in this situation. You're wrong. You should have known better. Now you're grounded. instead of like asking the questions.
Yeah.
And so you're taking a pretty radical stance against probably a lot of moms, I'm guessing. Has there been some decent pushback here? Like, let's get into the nitty gritty of that, because I think it's fun. I love when people buck the trends. I mean, I like when people poke the bear. It's fun,
It is fun. It's usually fun. Well, so here's the thing. Like, I feel like I am uniquely qualified to talk about pushing back on mommy wine culture because I was the the poster child for mommy wine culture. And here's what I mean. Before I quit drinking, I was for over 6 years a online health and fitness coach. So my business was all social media based. And I built my entire online social media persona around being a fitness loving mom. Like, I'm a marathon runner, I lift weights, I'm this coach, but still obsessed with wine. And you can be super healthy and fit, but also love wine because everything in moderation. So my whole persona
justification.
out
We can
there,
justify anything we want to do.
right?
Yep.
My whole persona was built around like sharing funny wine memes and I did. It's so cringy. Like, I've made a point to not delete any of it. It's like a roadmap of my stupidity over the years. Like, I would do these Friday wine workouts. It was it was so bad.
But I'm
And I was
really,
const
before you keep going, I'm really glad you didn't delete those, because
yeah.
I don't like when people do that. And I purposely have not deleted some of my very first podcasts that were horrendous, because I wanted people to see, like, look, you can do it too. This is the progression.
Yeah.
This is how it changes. And we live in a world now where if you don't agree with 100% of what you or I say today, then you're dead to me. And you can't have a different opinion than me. And my God, if you did something wrong 5 years ago, you're out. But it's like, well, wait a second. Why don't we start to actually cultivate the process of change and honor the process of change and
Yeah.
allow and watch people change to becoming better versions of who they are? So I commend you for not deleting it. I actually think it's fucking
Thank you.
awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I even make myself look at because I used to do a lot on Facebook back in the day. I'll look at my Facebook memories every day and be like, "Oh god."
Yeah.
But then I'll like share the pictures and be like, "Look at me like posing with this bottle of wine and talking about how it was only Monday, but it had been a long week and so yeah, already a long week and so I'm popping the bottle." I mean, just the jokes were so icky, but they were endless. And so I thought it was really funny and it was really cute. So, since I had this awakening and went through this journey to sort of embrace sobriety, I started realizing how damaging that message is. And I decided I could use that experience and the fact that I've grown, I've evolved, like the whole idea that, the Maya Angelou quote, once you know better, you can do better, right? Um, and so I use that to try and educate people, not to shame people. I'm not saying that everybody needs to quit drinking, but I'm saying that as you can be a mom who drinks without perpetuating this mommy wine phenomenon, right? You can just have a drink without wearing a t-shirt that says rosé all day and without sharing memes that talk about how or the picture of like your preschooler drew mommy doing her favorite thing and it's mommy with a glass
Right.
of wine and
Because
they're
it's actually
sharing it on
not
Facebook and
funny.
laughing.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. I think that comes back to the culture we live in now too. I don't know if I brought this up on a podcast, but I was talking recently with one of my friends that, and your parents might have been the same way, but do you remember back in the day where if you probably asked your parents who they voted for, they said it's none of your business when it came to the president?
Yeah,
Like
probably.
my parents, I never knew who my parents voted for because they said that's nobody else's business but mine. I'm not going to, it just is what it is. We don't need to create this culture around it. And I think that comes back to like people used to have an identity outside of social media that they could anchor to. Like my dad knew he was very good at his craft. And so that was his identity, not who he voted for, not who he stood with politically, not that he drank beers at camp on Friday night, not the mom that did, the rosé all day. Like, I think we're lacking purpose in life now. So we're starved to be a part of something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a really insightful way of looking at it. I totally agree. I mean, just 12 years ago, right, when my son was born, I didn't have any social media. Now I've got this whole identity that's tied to who I am and what I do on Instagram. It's so bizarre that that just is kind of been created out of the blue. It's really changed how we kind of move through the world.
Yeah. That and I think navigating that is teaching our children how to navigate that is going to be one of the hardest things I think our generation has to do.
Well, it's interesting. The biggest pushback I get because if you spend a few minutes on Instagram, well, maybe not you, right? Of course, the algorithm is going to show us different
Yeah.
things. But
Yeah.
when I spend a few minutes on Instagram, I see tons of the mommy wine jokes still,
Okay.
right? It's like uh the wine glass that has the measurements for it's been a okay day, it's been a bad day, it's been a horrible day, or just all that
Mine are
stuff.
whiskey glasses like that. So I've seen them
Yeah,
just in versions
right.
of whiskey.
I mean, it's like I'm not thinking of good examples now off the cuff, but people will say to me, "But I our kids aren't seeing these jokes on the internet. It's just funny. It's just a joke." Well, no. Jokes on the internet are not just jokes on the internet. What we see and consume on social media shapes the way we move through the world. It's that's why influencer marketing is this like billion-dollar enterprise now. We watch an influencer who, uses this new shampoo we have to try, or I buy shirts all the time from my favorite fashion bloggers that they should, when we see people talk about how wine is mommy's self-care. Wine is what mommy needs to survive the summer or spring break or algebra homework or whatever. That's shaping how we move through our lives.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because then subconsciously what the child is representing is that I'm too much for mommy to handle.
Yeah, I can't deal with you unless I have some wine.
Yeah.
That's the message we send. And yes, our kids aren't seeing the memes, right?
Well, or they
But
might be, depending on what age they
they
are. Your
might
son
be,
who's
yeah.
14 very well might be, they may be seeing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But those memes are shaping the way moms think about how they are supposed to take care of themselves, right? We don't need wine is not self-care.
Right.
Wine is not helping us in any way. It's making parenting exponentially harder, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. And it's really kind of insulting to us as moms to say all of these serious struggles that you have as a woman, whether you're a stay-at-home mom or a working mom, that can all just be solved by a big glass of wine.
Yeah. Yeah. The so what you bring up self-care and how wine's not self-care. When you took that out, what did you plug in? I mean, I guess you kind of had an advantage since you ran a fitness blog. You knew maybe some more advantaged things to do, but like, what are some things out there that you recommend
Yeah,
women
no,
do?
that's a really good question. I think when people think of self-care, they think like a manicure or a bubble bath, right? And it's a lot deeper than that.
My
And
life
I
coach came
really
on
think
here and she was like, getting your nails done is not self-care.
right.
Everybody was like, damn it.
Could be, right? It could be part of that.
Yeah.
But it's not. Self-care is really it's on a deeper level and you have to think about what it means for you. For me, self-care is carving out enough alone time because I'm a big introvert, right? Self-care can be making sure I get enough sleep, that I get enough exercise, that I get enough sunshine. It can be asking my partner, for my husband, for more support because I'm bearing the brunt of the mental burden for all things kid related and I need some relief. It can be um taking time to read a book and a bubble bath, right? But those are just small parts of the bigger, like, what do I need? For somebody who's more extroverted, it might mean they need time with friends and time to socialize, or it's whatever is gonna really recharge us, refill our batteries. And my issue with wine and or just drinking in
Sure.
general as self-care is that it actually keeps us from doing the real things that are gonna provide relief, right? We think, "Oh, I need this. I'm so stressed," or I can't deal with all of this. I need wine." Well, we do that and it makes us cranky, it makes us tired, it affects our mental health,
It
and it
perpetuates a
keeps
stress
us
response for sure.
right, and it keeps us from doing those legitimate forms of self-care that are gonna really fill our cup and equip us to handle the stress in our lives.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. So what sparked the idea to write the book? Because I mean,
So,
you'd been living it
I've
for a
always
while. You probably were talking about it on Instagram, and then it was like, okay, it's time to take it to the next level, I'm guessing.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I've always been a writer, in some capacity, and writing is always sort of how I process what's going on in my head. It's like something happens and I have to write about it in order to kind of make sense of it. So when I, woke up that day and decided I was done with alcohol, it was a simple decision, but it wasn't easy, right? It wasn't like this switch flipped and I was just done and I skipped off into the sunset and never had a drink again. I mean, it was, it was a process and it took some work figuring out who I was and learning to navigate the world without alcohol after kind of depending on it for so long. So I started writing. I was kind of journaling, right? It was helping me make sense of it all. And because I was already out there on social media, I started sharing little tidbits and I was really scared to talk about this publicly,
Of course.
and the response was like, "Oh my gosh, me too. Me too. Oh, I felt the same way." Um, and so I just kept sharing more and more, and I kept writing more and more, and I read during that time a lot of quit lit books, right? Quit lit is kind of how we refer to all the books out drinking and people who've quit drinking and these memoirs and self-help books about
Okay.
alcohol. And they were great, they helped me a lot, but most of them were sort of rock bottom stories, right? They were
Yep.
people who were hiding. I mean, I say this with 0 judgment because I'm certain I could have gotten there, but they were, hiding alcohol around the house, they were drinking first thing in the morning, they were, experiencing these really serious external consequences, DUIs, worried about losing their kids, their houses, their jobs, and I couldn't relate to that because that's not what my story looked like, right? I
See, I
didn't
think that's kind of more powerful though, because I do think a lot of people are always like, oh, you got to hit rock bottom and you'll figure it out. But like, you don't actually. Like, if you're
yeah,
proactive and you just feel a certain way about something, you don't have to hit rock bottom.
and really, like, rock bottom is just as low as we're willing to go, right? So people will say, "You did hit your rock bottom is just where you quit." Well, that's fine, maybe that's the case, but then my rock bottom didn't look very bad because my husband didn't even know I was struggling. I mean, I
Right.
kept it all inside, I looked like I was crushing it out there. Um, and so I started to realize and people refer to it as gray area drinking, right? This alcohol use disorder occurs on a spectrum. It's not just you're an alcoholic or you're not. It's a spectrum. And I was probably somewhere hanging out on that spectrum, but I didn't need a label. I don't identify with the word alcoholic. Um, and I don't have to, right? I think it's cool if you do, but, that just didn't feel like part of my story. And I decided that it would have been really helpful if I had had a book that I could relate to, a story that I was like, "Wow, that sounds just like me." So I decided I was gonna tell it, and I was gonna do it, and now it's feels kind of surreal that it's actually happening.
Yeah. I think it might be the more the masculine, but I think that, I like your approach to it though, because a lot of times we find in society now, again, it's that black and white. It's either you either eat carnivore or you're a vegan. Like, and if it's anything in between, you're doing it wrong. Like whatever these things are. And I love that it's more, you're just kind of leading by example. You're just like, hey, this is what I do. This works for me. This works for my family. Maybe give it a try. If you don't want to, keep drinking your wine. It's not a big deal. Like, I'm not shaming you for what you've done. And I think that's important, because I definitely think when we grew up, shame was kind of just how you got people to do things.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
I mean, for sure. Well, again, I don't know, but I don't want to speak for other people, but it's definitely was an easy way to get kids to do things. And shame them into doing the things that you want them to do. And it's like, well, fuck, that's not the right. I don't want to feel that way.
Yeah. And I've felt so much shame tied to my drinking over the years that I refuse to feel anymore now that I'm sober. And I
Yeah.
don't want to contribute to anyone else feeling shame. So like you said, it's not about judging somebody who, if you drink and you feel great about your relationship with alcohol and the way you drink, awesome, then my message isn't for you. My message is for the people who feel like I felt.
Yep.
And we're struggling, right? I just want to show them that there's a way out. I don't think I'm not trying to reinstate prohibition here.
That's good. I'd have to not agree with you if you were.
Right.
Yeah.
I just know how crappy I felt. And I thought I was the only one experiencing it like that. I thought there's something wrong with me. I can't drink like everyone else. Well, come to find out, there's lots of us. It's kind of crazy the amount we're expected to drink and feel okay with. So if you don't feel okay with it, here's my experience.
Well, and that's kind of started this podcast was sort of the same thing. Like, I was at a cigar lounge. My buddy's like, hey, you should bring up some of these things you talk about, like, and how you parent Sloan, whatever. And it was really me trying to seek comfort of like, I'm always fucking tired and exhausted. And it's not because I don't take care of myself. It's just like the weight of all the things. And I'm like, you walk around thinking I'm the only person dealing with this. Like, I'm the only person that has this much going on, that has this much intensity, that has to be on 24/7, that can't even answer text messages. And then you like find out that, you start talking to people and they're like, dude, that's how I feel too. Like, it's so much, it's like, oh, wait a second. Why isn't anybody talking about this? And that was where, I had hired, my life coach, and she came on. She was amazing. And I was like, there's just really not a lot of help for men. I don't want to say we need help, because it's very, very different. It's very, very different. Like how we perceive the world and how you perceive the world. Like the example, and I'm definitely going to bring this up now because I haven't before, but one of my friends had sent me so there's a girl, a woman who transitioned to a man and did that for, I think it was a year. And then she wrote a book about her experience of doing that. And then she killed herself because of what the mental turmoil was of what men deal with. Okay. Follow me here. Then one of my friends had sent me somebody transitioned, and they had it was this whole post about like, 10 things of why we need to have more grace towards men and what they're actually dealing with. And like all of these things. Right. And I'm like, okay, but the 10 things you brought up, I literally don't give even 1% attention to. Like, they're not things that a man thinks about. It was a woman's brain that transitioned to a man that is worried about these things, right? And it was a woman who decided to live like a man to see how it was, that couldn't handle it psychologically, that killed herself. But it was the difference in that. And so I started thinking like, I'm trying to seek help for this stress load that I have, and I'm seeking out potentially the wrong people to help me, not men. Like maybe this is why grandfathers are so fucking important and why dads are so important. Like maybe we need to reactivate that age group and culture to be teaching these younger men how to move through the world, act in the world, because it's not the same. Like, does what I'm saying kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, this totally tracks. And that's why I love what you're doing out here with the podcast, especially as a mom of boys. One of the things I think a lot about as we talk about our youth kind of going through this collective like mental health crisis, right? Depression and anxiety are on the uprise and all of this. And traditionally, these are things that men don't talk about, they don't seek out help for, they don't ask for help the same way or talk about things,
Sure.
at least that's the stereotype, the same way that women do. And I think things like your podcast and other, my 14-year-old son is seeing some of this on social media, and we talked about it recently as I was kind of checking in on his anxiety level and all of that. And he's like, "Yeah, I found this guy on TikTok who talks about, like he kind of like coaches teen boys on talking about their mental health with friends and all this." And I'm like, I mean, this is amazing,
Yeah.
right? Because that men my age were not talking about stuff like that at 14.
No, definitely not. But again, this comes all the way back to the podcast and why it was started is if you have fathers that are present in the home, they can
Mhm.
talk to their sons about this.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that if fathers and it's because I'm a dad and I know that this is a hard stance and I'm not negating the power of moms, but I believe 90% of the world's issues would go away if fathers would start being fathers again, start being present, and start helping raise their children the right way. Like, I truly believe that to have that stable masculine structure. Like, I teach my daughter now, Sloan, if he doesn't pay for your dinner, if he doesn't open the door for you, and he doesn't walk on the same side or the side of oncoming traffic, I'm like, what is he? She's like, a loser. And you don't go out on a date with him again. Period.
I love it.
Like, if you can't do those basic things, you're out. And if we don't, and I promise you, this is my tangent to end it, but I promise you that the reason men aren't showing up the way women want them to show up anymore is they're not demanding it. Because men want to court a woman, and they're only going to court a woman if they demand it. Period. They're going to do whatever they have to do to find a mate in a ever increasingly challenging environment. And if that means holding the door for her, then start demanding it. If every woman's like, "Hey, I'm not going on another date with you. You didn't pay for dinner. You didn't open the door, and you didn't walk on the side of oncoming traffic." And those are pretty fucking basic things. Guess what? All of the guys in the world are going to start doing again. If you didn't do that in the 40s or 50s, you didn't get a second date. It was standard.
Yeah, that's true.
And so that comes back to men teach your daughters how to be treated. Men teach your sons how to treat women. And then women hold up that standard of what you demand in a man, and I promise he'll show up. Sorry, that's my tangent.
I like that. No, I like your tangent. And it's really interesting as somebody who always thought I was gonna have girls, right? I'm a girly girl. I was like, I'm obvious, and then I end up with 3 boys, and it turns out I freaking love it.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad it worked out this way because I look at our friends with girls and I'm like, whew, I wouldn't know what to do. It's just whatever you're used to, you get used to.
Of course.
But there's all kinds of lessons that I'm now faced with teaching my sons that I had never really thought about before. But they're really important, and it's great. My poor boys know to roll their eyes, like we're middle school boys are obsessed with The Office. Right?
Yeah.
So
That's
my son,
great. Like the TV show?
yeah.
Awesome.
Like right. So we're watching I was with my older son when I finally said, "Okay, you're allowed to watch it, but I'm gonna watch it with you." He's like, "Oh god, mom," because every 5 minutes I would pause it and be like, Wait, okay, we need to have a talk about this." Like, you get why this is totally inappropriate and why they're making a joke out of this, and I mean, of course, I turned the whole thing into, like, a feminism lecture,
Yeah.
and he's like, "Oh god, can you just push play? Can we just watch the damn show?"
Yeah.
But it's
But I love that they're actually watching that again, though, because if you can watch that and understand it's common, it's one of my favorite TV shows. Then it's not dead. Then we're not dying as a culture of everything being sterile.
Yeah. And I love that because my older son gets it, and he gets the humor and he appreciates it. Whereas my younger son, we tried watching one episode and I was like, oh God, I have to like pause it and explain every joke and why. I'm like, okay, you're either not ready for this or this is not going to be your sense of humor.
Sure.
But you love it when when they get it and they
Yeah.
appreciate why it's funny and why it's irreverent and why, you know.
Yeah. I love it. Awesome. All right. Well, we got to wrap up here because we're up against it. So why don't you tell everybody where they can get your book, where they can find you? I'll link everything, of course, in the bio for the podcast when it drops. But let everybody know.
Awesome. So Instagram is where I spend most of my time online, and I am at Hadley_Sorensen. So it's really easy to find. My website is hadleysorensen.com. You can follow book updates. But probably by the time this airs, it'll be out Tuesday, May 14th on Amazon. And the book is called The Dirty Truth on Social Drinking.
I love it. Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yes. Beautiful. All right.